Over this next 5 years, a lot of consumers, a lot of buyers are going to be turning to agents to do a lot of that buyer journey process on their behalf. Marketers have been focused on, hey, we market to humans. With the rise of Google, they're like, well, okay, we still need to market to humans, but now we have to kind of think about marketing to the Google bot. If you're a business that, has these customer service, customer inquiries coming in on your website, like putting the data in place and empowering like a customer agent to start to handle those interactions. You can do really good like monitoring and analysis of this stuff. It's actually, in the grand scheme of things, I think become a relatively safe first step. But that is true AI agent capabilities, and you can start to see pretty immediate benefit from it.
Welcome back to another episode of Growth Unlocked. I'm your host, Kieran Krohn. Today, we're going to dig into a topic that's changing the way that businesses run, AI agents, which I'm sure you've probably come across if you haven't been sleeping under a rock. Systems that take action and actually make decisions with little to no human involvement. Our guest today is Scott Brinker, VP of Platform Ecosystem at HubSpot, and someone that people may know as the godfather of martech. Scott's been talking about this shift as the most important change in marketing since the internet itself. In our conversation today, we're going to explore a couple of different topics, around what makes AI agents different, how they're reshaping workflows, what it means for data, for customers, and even for how software companies think about pricing. More importantly, I guess, we'll get into what leaders should do now to prepare and where the real competitive advantage will come from in a world where machines are doing more of the work. Scott, thanks for joining us.
Wow, yeah, this sounds like a great show. I'm excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, this is going to be an absolute cracker. So let's get stuck into it. Starting with the first one, I guess, Scott, you've said that AI agents are the biggest change in marketing since the internet, which is pretty wild. Why do you see this being such a big shift and not just another tech upgrade?
Yeah, well, it's funny. So GPT, what it stands for in the context of AI, like I even completed something like general purpose transformer or whatever it says. But there's this other concept of GPT that is much earlier of this idea of general purpose technologies. Throughout history, things like fire, things like, the internet, it's one of these things where they have the property that they are so universal in the sorts of things that they enable that they really do like create a new epic of how life works, how business works. And yeah, I definitely see that, not just agents, but really this whole sort of broader wave of AI. It's one of those general purpose technologies. Even just in the context of marketing, you start looking at all the different use cases of like, okay, well, we're doing this to do, production with content. And we've got this other thing that can do data analysis. And we can have this automated customer service agent that's, answering questions 24/7 for customers. It's phenomenal. And so even if you were just looking at these technologies through the lens of how does it change the way marketers operate and produce and, the capabilities they have, that alone would be mind-boggling. But the thing is, it's not limited just to the marketers. Even the buyers, the customers, the consumers, they're now tapping AI instead of just doing like a Google search. They're going to ChatGPT or, Claude or Gemini or things like this to like, hey, here's what I'm interested in. And, what could you recommend? And how would you evaluate this company versus that other company? It's like creating this whole new channel and dynamic for how buyers actually engage with us. And of course, what's the job of marketers? It's figuring out, okay, well, we go where the audience is and engage them the way they want to be engaged. And so, that's a whole nother dimension of this that we're having to, learn from scratch. So yeah, it's big.
It's massive, right? And it impacts businesses of all shapes and sizes, which actually gets me thinking back to an article that I saw, a piece of news that I think Yamini's even spoken about in terms of HubSpot seeing a pretty dramatic impact on traffic that's coming through to the website from traditional search, right? You probably know the stats better than I do, but it was pretty mind-boggling to see how much organic traffic has dropped to the HubSpot website, which is, the OG inbound website, right? been going for over a decade. And I know that there's been a lot of work around like diversification of different content sources. Obviously, like podcasting is a big big thing now, and like kind of seems like HubSpot, like a lot of like great businesses becoming more of like, not more of, but like a media company, right? Like there's so many different channels that HubSpot is producing content through, and obviously optimizing for LLMs, etc. How can businesses, I guess, kind of take, maybe smaller companies, mid-market size companies, take some of the learnings that HubSpot has had, and kind of what can they apply to their business today?
Yeah. Well, one thing I really want to emphasize here is it's not that content has gone away from being an important component of how buyers make decisions in their journey. It's that we've lost the visibility to the top of the funnel dynamic because I mean, let's face it, what do these LLMs do? They basically hoover up, all of the possible content. They're voracious, more voracious than Google ever was, right? They're trying to absorb all this content and knowledge so that when their users type in questions of like, hey, I'm thinking of this, or how would you explain this? It's got to have source material that then it's relying on. And these engines have actually gotten pretty good about providing attribution on these things as well, too. But just because, all right, it brings in your content, a prospective customer has a question that's relevant to your business, the LLM gives a phenomenal answer, actually also even cites you as the reference for that. This is a wonderful thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that buyer's like clicking through at anything at that moment or in any way giving any sort of signal that, would let you attribute that. But at the end of the day, it still actually changed like this help frame their interest. And, you may not have the attribution visibility to it, but you have now found your way into the selection set. So I guess I just want to emphasize that because, while there are all these other channels that we are nurturing, things like video, podcasts, things where we do start to still see a little bit more of the metrics of like, oh, how many people consume that stream? How many people watch this video? Definitely good to invest in those things, but I would not underinvest in the raw content that inbound marketing and always provided. It's still as important as ever. It's just coming through a different channel.
Mm. Yeah, and it feels like there's been this, I've seen a lot of people talking about uh, GPTs and these LLMs putting a lot of weight on like video content. Like YouTube seems to be pretty heavily referenced. Even, communities like Reddit starting to become quite commonly cited. And, it kind of speaks to this truth around, uh, you know, it's all around delivering truth, right? Because I think like that's one thing I love about Reddit is like that's one of the only sources of the internet that I kind of still trust to go find opinions that I can trust because you look at the numbers and you look at the mass. There's a few people that are trolling, but I think it's just so interesting to see, and that's probably one of these kind of channels that like businesses, especially B2B, would probably neglect, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, this is sort of the nature of almost generational shifts, in what are the channels and the consumption patterns that resonate with people. And it's always been the danger that, an older generation, they think of it through the lens of, the channels and the formats that they liked, and so they can sometimes be slow to like adapt to, well, actually, there's new channels and new formats. You might not be a TikTok user, but as it turns out, there's quite a few people who are and actually really love consuming, content in that form. And so, I don't know. Again, this has always been one of the things that the roles of marketers are to kind of be ahead of the rest of the company in just sort of understanding the cultural zeitgeist shifts, at least the ones that are relevant to their audience. So, yeah.
I guess if we take it back and maybe even think about unpacking it, Scott, in simple terms, what makes an AI tool, um, you know, what is different from an AI tool versus an agent? If we just think about, being an assistant or a piece of automation.
Yeah, this is this is a fun question because anytime we have language that is even slightly subjective, yes, people. It's but when you have language that is both very popular and viral, And the definition lends itself to not being incredibly precise. Everyone's like, well, everything's an agent, agentic. There's like a running battle right now between agentic and vibe. Is like, in fact, actually, if you could have vibe agentic, oh my goodness, it would be the best of all things. So with that as a caveat, I'd say my interpretation of what makes something truly agentic, versus all the other ways in which we can leverage AI and machine learning and, automation and, augmentation of how we work, is it's really this notion of autonomy, the ability that I can give an agent a relatively high level instruction and I can trust it to figure out how to deliver that result or execute, that request on my behalf. And again, there's degrees of agentic has a lot to do with like, okay, well, what's the scope of that? Do I trust it to go out and research a bunch of things and collate them together into a spreadsheet reference? That's one level of trust. Do I trust it to like, I'm just going to put this on the front of our incoming email inbox, and I'm just going to let it, answer any question that any customer, comes and asks. There's very different degrees of trust associated across that spectrum. And I think, that's just one of the things right now is it's not that the more modest scope of agentic solutions now aren't useful. They're incredibly useful. But this is also where you get people sort of having to mediate like, okay, how much scope of trust do we give these things, and our comfort level with what we will do today versus what we might do next year or 5 years from now. It's a rapidly shift. It's a moving target.
Yeah, and it's a really good point. I think like that element or that consideration of trust is particularly something that businesses need to keep in mind when it comes to anything that might be outwards facing, right? Interacting with customers and prospects, etc. And where I think there's probably an opportunity for businesses to experiment with agents is more in the operational side of the business, things that are actually kind of augmenting or potentially replacing some of the tasks that workers and people are doing within the business from an operational perspective. So there's obviously still risk associated with that, but at least it's not going to project onto the world if it doesn't go so well.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Although it's interesting because, one of the cases of a relatively autonomous customer facing agent technology that we've seen just catch fire over this past year is the customer service agents. Now, I don't know, for like, what is it, 5-10 years or so, we've all had the sort of chatbot things, on websites, which historically have largely sucked. Like you get 2 or 3 questions in that and you're like, can you just please connect me to an actual human being? What's fascinating is with the LLM technologies now being applied to these, that absolutely, they just thrive on having like really good conversational interactions. And from an integration perspective, people are now connecting those LLMs to their full knowledge bases. They have things like ticket histories, customer, all this stuff, that again, the LLMs are actually very, very good at interpreting that unstructured data and mapping to it. Like in this past year, you've just seen these customer service agents go from being something that was kind of science fairish, to something that's genuinely useful, and you're seeing, for some of these systems, like their ability to resolve customer questions, like it's a 60, 70, 80% resolution rate of customers being happy, like, oh yeah, no, this was exactly what I needed. Thank you. That was quick and it's off to the races. And so, that's a case where companies have come to now trust those customer service agents. Again, there's guardrails and there's scope, but the scope is actually quite big in the scheme of things. So I don't know. Is it the exception that proves the rule? Maybe.
Yeah, it's something that we've noticed as well. I mean, we work a lot with implementing HubSpot and optimizing HubSpot for the clients that we work with, and that's probably one of the most requested agents that we come across, and seems to be almost like the low hanging fruit, right? Where especially for businesses that have got a high volume of inquiries, I think it makes a lot of sense, and the technology is already proven to be working. So yeah, we love it. I guess, Scott, you touched on this concept of data, right? And I think that's really important because the AI is really only as good as the data that's being fed.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the most common issues that we come across with businesses that are using technology and CRM is the quality of the data and being able to trust it. And so, you've mentioned that companies with the best data are going to have the edge, which I would definitely agree with. What does, I guess, having the best data actually mean, and what should a business be doing now to get there?
Yeah, great, great topic. Definitely a passion topic for me. I think there's a few different things. So one thing is, are you actually collecting the right data? I mean, like a perfect example would be, in customer service, are the things being resolved in these sort of one-off ways that are never being tracked, and it's just a manual process that gets repeated again and again, and there's no, sort of like artifacts, that are intentionally being collected, to like, hey, can we look and understand these patterns? But this is across, the business. I mean, we have all these touch points with customers that have the potential to generate all sorts of useful data. Historically, we actually haven't collected a lot of that data because, in all fairness, we didn't necessarily have the technology that would have like taken advantage of that. So, like, what's the point? And so, I think this is one of the things that, just as companies make this shift into an AI world where data actually has a lot more usability, instrumenting more of these collection mechanisms. Then once you've got that, then you've got this issue of like, okay, well, there's a lot of different places across the company that you're collecting that data. How do you start to like, bring it together? And even when folks talk about things like universal data layers and companies using things like cloud data warehouses or things like that, very awesome. But again, that doesn't happen magically. It's a very powerful and enabling technology and architecture, but still actually requires work to like bring that together. And then once you've done that, you then come to the next problem that, again, people just didn't think about so much because they never made it past the first two barriers. But now you've got all this data collected. It's now flowing across the organization in a universal data layer. And now you're like, well, wait a second, the way this team here is defining this data and talking these things, and the way this other team is talking about it, and like we have a different field here. I mean, the reality is like this sort of cataloging and rationalization, of data. It's something that just, again, companies haven't had the need to get good at that, because just the other barriers, you never got to that stage. But now that you're in a position you can get to the stage, again, that's the next thing of like, who's your, I don't know, it's almost, this is kind of an ancient metaphor for it, but it's almost like who's your librarian? Who's the person who's like actually helping to organize and govern a certain amount of that data, so that it does line up. It is usable, it is consumable, it can be identified in the right ways by these AI tools, and so that's all a lot of, each one of those steps is still a lot of work, but those are the things companies ultimately need to do if they want to be able to harness all that data that they have adjacencies to. So a lot of data work.
Yeah, there's a lot. And I feel like one of the more important parts, and you touched on this, is around this concept of like governance, right? Like, what are the kind of rules and, you know, workflows that allow data to come into these systems, particularly CRM, and then how are we keeping that data up to date, right? And I think like this is one of these observations and this thinking that I've had over the last couple of months around, typically like CRMs can be pretty static, right? Like data is often not being updated, depending on the customer. Those databases in contacts, companies, deals, might not be updated for days, weeks, months, even years. And I think this, like, where you can see obviously HubSpot with Breeze and the acquisition of Clearbit, and then even like these kind of AI first CRMs, and then tools like Clay, etc. Yeah, have the ability to have this kind of always on enrichment, like always looking out for signals in the market. People may be moving jobs, or these different kind of events that are happening, and being able to have this kind of always on system that's keeping the data cleaned and up to date, I think is really important. I mean, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, again, like this is so there are definitely these things of like the always on, systems. Clay is absolutely fantastic. I think one particular facet of this that had always been out of reach was all this unstructured data. We have all these phone conversations, with prospects. We have all these email exchanges. And for the most part, that data, again, it either wasn't collected, or if it was collected, it wasn't really interpretable programmatically at scale. And so now, I mean, again, this is, these LLMs are absolutely fantastic at this. And so when even people talk about like an AI CRM, really the core seed of that is to say like, hey, instead of having to think of all this like structured data and, people manually entering that, let's just take all the unstructured data and we can interpret what that means and make these changes dynamically. And clearly that's something like, you don't have to just be a native AI CRM to do that. You're seeing Salesforce, HubSpot, pretty much every CRM or marketing platform on the planet at this point is like, yeah, of course, let's like ingest this unstructured data and be able to automatically interpret it and do things with it. And that's exciting. I mean, I've been on this data mission for a very long time. It sort of goes with the whole martech territory. And one of the stats, variations of this over the years, but one of the stats that always was fascinating was something like 60-70% of the data that companies would collect never got used. Not even once for like even like an analytical query of some kind. And that was even before we really started absorbing all of this unstructured data systematically around, well, let's get all of the documents and all of the emails and all those phone conversations. If you had incorporated that too, it was like, well, maybe we actually use 2% of the data that, we have access to. With AI, everything from like, again, this ability to automate more and more of the processing, being able to like truly interpret unstructured data in a useful and reliable way. Oh my goodness, it's getting to the place where it's like, it's inverted. It's like the vast majority of data that companies now have, they can actually make use of. And that's pretty, I mean, again, this is just one of these things that's, it's almost just sort of happened. Like, I don't know, should I be as excited as I am about it? But it seems like one of these like just fundamental transformations of like, oh my goodness, the world changed from data being like this, basically decaying, unused asset for the large part, to now being like an integral part of like the real-time operations of our business, the reaction speed, we can have as an organization with this data. It's incredible. We've barely gotten used to taking advantage of what this makes possible.
Mm. Yeah, and one of the things that I have loved is structuring conversational data from transcripts from conversations with sales and customer success and customer support. Oh boy, it's like what you can do with that is it's incredible. And I also love how it can be used to, augment, what say like a good manager or leader should be doing, right? If you think about like a sales manager, they should be providing consistent coaching and feedback to their people based off, what they're doing well, what they're not doing well, identifying those coaching opportunities. And that's one thing we've loved doing with customers is how do we firstly structure that and then get AI to do some of the kind of feedback and the coaching on top of that?
Yeah, I mean, I always, think of Gong as like, the pioneer in that space, and I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, we used it, HubSpot, uses Gong. We actually used it even in our partnership team, like our ability to like be programmatically listening into conversations, across all of these, prospect calls, and be able to like programmatically identify, hey, there are these signals that this prospect is probably going to be interested in this partner solution, and being able to then like automatically surface that up to the, AE of like, hey, they mentioned, this thing, we've got two partners that do exactly that. Here's the info for you. And then the AE is in a position that they can, like very quickly, like, oh, by the way, you brought up this, we want to let you know we have this solution here in our ecosystem. I mean, like everyone wins, the partner, the customer, HubSpot. And it's just, again, it's leveraging this set of unstructured data, conversational data coming out of Kong that, again, 5-10 years ago, like this stuff would have been like science fiction.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Scott, when you look at, I guess, the spectrum from AI just helping people on one side to on the other side, basically running on its own and doing its own thing, where do you think the biggest opportunities will be in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I've drawn an illustration of this to try and wrap my head around it. I'm kind of a like if I can't doodle it, I can't wrap my head around it, which is clearly a limitation, but because I don't doodle very well. But it's like I sort of have always like thought of marketing in three buckets. There's the strategy and creative, which is what we always think of as marketing and we prize. But in reality, the total number of calories that marketing teams have spent directly on strategy and creative has been relatively small. Most of the calories have gone to the second bucket of production and analysis, just all the work involved in actually producing those creatives, analyzing the impact of the strategies. And then there's been this third bucket of like the technology and infrastructure, the marketing operations, supports that. And again, it's become a core part of marketing, but as most marketing ops people will probably attest, still not really where most of the calories or resourcing is gone. And the thing that's fascinating about so many of these AI technologies is they are really right in that second bucket of like changing the efficiency dynamics, not just the efficiency, but even like the scope of what's possible to be created by people of who aren't specialists. It's incredible. Like, are you seeing in some cases like 70, 80, 90% reduction, in the actual time and cost and resourcing required in production analysis? It is a dramatic change. Now, this is where, I think there's a line of thinking out there of companies saying like, great, we've just, like removed 80%, of the overhead associated with production analysis. Let's get rid of a bunch of marketers and, just take it to the bottom line. I think it's a very short-sighted view to this, because that efficiency gain is basically being commoditized. Like every company's going to have that efficiency gain, on the production analysis. And so if you basically just pocket that gain and do nothing with, sort of that redistribution of talent and resourcing, like you're going to lose out to other companies who basically take that benefit and they're like, okay, we're now going to invest this in dramatically accelerating, the rate of experimentation, the ability to do more micro segmented targeting. Like we are going to go crazy with what's possible on a strategy and creative side in ways that just weren't even conceivable, just weren't even pragmatically possible before. And then the second side of it is, again, like to, really empower people to do that marketing ops, that marketing tech team, our conversation here about data, like really doubling down on the investment in making sure that, the infrastructure and the operating system that we have in place to enable that incredibly rapid acceleration of experimentation and strategy and creative. So that's a really long-winded answer to your question. I think the thing we're going to see the most value of still over this next year or two is going to be that massive efficiency gain in production analysis, and how that changes the game for those companies who really do want to invest in the strategy, creative, and the tech infrastructure to empower that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, isn't it? Because I guess there's definitely a divide here, and there's people on one side that are saying, we're going to see a lot more of these companies that have got way smaller headcounts and less overheads that are producing a lot more revenue and a lot more profit. But then I guess the point that you're making here is, the companies that are taking that efficiency gain, reinvesting it back into it, can like probably move faster because they create more leverage by keeping that headcount in place. And so, yeah, I guess I'm not really sure if I sort of sit on one side or the other. I can kind of see, both sides of the coin. But it is interesting though, like seeing some pretty big companies, maybe like some of the largest companies. I think Microsoft laid off, what is it, 19,000 people in the last couple of months. And they're talking about like margins are increasing. So you're already starting to see that. I guess they're a little bit different because they're a huge company already, and they probably had potentially a lot of inefficiencies, and they've got their partnership with OpenAI as well. But it's going to be really interesting to see sort of which direction it goes.
Yeah, no, totally. And I feel like this is one of these things where my my scope of domain expertise is relatively narrow. So when we're talking about marketing and martech, I feel like I've kind of got my arms around those dynamics. There's a much larger point here of, as we started this conversation with, right? AI is this very general purpose technology that's changing the dynamics for a tremendous number of professions. And while I think there's a very strong case for companies to reinvest the efficiency gains in the marketing side into other opportunities, whether or not the headcount involved in that are fungible is actually a fair point too. People might have been good at production analysis, might not actually be the ones who are great at doing, more strategy and creative. But total headcount wise, like I think, a redistribution there as an investment is a very strong move. But there are whole bunches of other professions that it's just not clear. I mean, what's, one of the common examples often cited is like, paralegals, in paralegal research, like, okay, is there really something the AI can now do a lot of that work for you? Is there really some other thing in that professional space that you would redirect the human talent to? Maybe not. And so, I mean, there's a lot of like really serious societal level questions of how this sort of like reshifting around of professions is going to work. And yeah, I mean, again, I'm optimistic that in marketing, those dynamics there are factors that I think are going to allow marketing teams to like evolve if marketers really want to, but that is by no means like a panacea for like so many other professions, and is kind of scary.
It is, yeah. I think some people are really scared. I think some people are really excited. There's a huge spectrum, isn't there?
Yeah, it usually depends. Like, are you the person running the company, or are you the person working for the company? I shouldn't make light of that, but yeah, it's who gets excited and who gets scared about this is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, before we started the recording, we were touching on this topic of, agents obviously being helpful on the seller side and the company side, but also equally useful on the buyer side. And that's something I don't think too many people talk about. Love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, it is the thing that I am most excited about from like just a transformation of marketing in the next 5 years, which is, to your point, lots of great agentic AI capabilities that, we're working with here on the seller side. We're starting to see more and more of this emergence of buyers using agents that have agency to them. They're not being run by the seller. They might be run by a third party like an OpenAI or, Anthropic, but they're actually operating on behalf of the buyer, on the customer. And, people are already using this to set things loose on like, hey, go do a deep research analysis of what are my choices of how should I think about purchases in this particular category, and give me these alternatives, help me evaluate. That's amazing. And then even in certain categories, on the e-commerce side, you're seeing people be like, yeah, okay, go out, find this best deal for me and purchase it for me, and off to go. Still really early on that stuff, but you see where that's headed, and you're like, yeah, over this next 5 years, a lot of consumers, a lot of buyers are going to be turning to agents to do a lot of that buyer journey process on their behalf. And so for marketers, wow. Okay. I mean, we were talking earlier that the closest analogy to this is what happened with Google and SEO. That up until that point, marketers had been focused on, hey, we market to humans. With the rise of Google, they're like, well, okay, we still need to market to humans, but now we have to kind of think about marketing to the Google bot, because that becomes the way in which we get to those humans. And this whole field of SEO, was created just around how do we do a good job of serving that one agent, one very important agent. Now with what's this wave that's coming of so many new kinds of buyer agents, it's like we're gonna have all these other different kinds of intermediaries between us and the customer, and we're gonna have to get good at marketers of serving those agents as a constituency unto themselves. How do you attract an agent? What makes an agent happy? It's probably like can it get access to the right sort of data, and how do you feed that content, and how discoverable do you make things for it? Like, yeah, I don't know. We're going to have, I mean, again, whatever the SEO term, was, it's not just about AI engine LLM optimization. That's one piece of it. I think it's just a much broader thing of like all kinds of specialized agents. We're going to have to get good at marketing to them too.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, if you were to say you want to give one piece of advice to go-to-market leaders that might be listening to this show and thinking, okay, spoken a lot about agents, AI is here, but I'm not really sure where to start. What's one piece of advice you would give them?
Start small. Even again, like we can talk HubSpot because I happen to know that really well. If you're a business that, has these customer service, customer inquiries coming in on your website, like putting the data in place and empowering like a customer agent to start to handle those interactions. And again, there's always an escape valve. There's always an easy way. You can do really good like monitoring and analysis of the stuff. It's actually, in the grand scheme of things, I think become a relatively safe first step. But that is true AI agent capabilities, and you can start to see pretty immediate benefit from it. I think, we've got the HubSpot Inbound event coming up here, and I think you can expect to see other kinds of agentic things there. And again, this is sort of like HubSpot's mission has always been, listen, the tech is phenomenal. There's so much innovation that happens out there, but the real magic is how do you package that and present that in a way that actually makes it really accessible, for businesses that aren't techie businesses, to be able to take steps with this and use this stuff productively. So, the main thing is just being willing to try this stuff.
That's right. Yeah, I think it's the mindset, isn't it? Just don't worry if it's not perfect, because it probably won't be, but yeah, just have that experimentation mindset and that culture and test in small environments where you can.
These are the things that they're very easy to say, and to actually the mechanics of executing it is fairly easy. But I love the way you think of it as it's almost like a mental model thing. It's hard. I mean, let's just face it. Human beings generally we're change averse, categorically. And boy, this is a time there's just so much change. I think if you're able to make the conscious decision to overcome that, natural resistance to change, that's going to give you an incredible edge over your competitors, because most of them are also very resistant to change as well too.
They are for now, right? But I think we're just the early stage of that kind of innovator part of the curve. And once you see the early adopters, then, it's going to be a bit of a gold rush, right?
Exactly.
Scott, really appreciate your time. It's been an awesome conversation. If people wanted to follow along or, learn more about what you're doing, what's the best place for them to do that?
So I write a blog about marketing technology, which seems to have been completely hijacked by all sorts of AI and AI agentic topics. And it's chiefmartech.com. That's Chief Martech without the H at the end. That's a branding discussion for another day.
Awesome. Scott, thanks again. Really appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Growth Unlocked Beyond Scale. If you enjoyed the show, it would really be appreciated if you can leave a 5-star review wherever you consume your podcasts. And while you're there, why not subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future episodes? If you'd like to learn about how to drive profitable scale in your business, gain clarity on your direction, and improve your business valuation, click the link in the show notes to connect with Kieran.